Hello, everyone, and welcome to Trek Prime Episode 44. We almost called it 44 last week, but we're getting it right this week. It's really 44 this time. And this is a subject that, we've kind of been, throwing it around between the two of us for a while, how we were going to do this. And basically, it's going to reduce down to our favorite scientific principles introduced in Star Trek, We're going to put this at TOS and up through Enterprise. And the reason I say that is because, I don't want to mention canon all the time because I'm tired of canon prime. Oh my goodness, it's crazy out there hearing this debate. So, we're talking about everybody, So, we're just talking about those, Star Trek between 66 and 2005. We're talking about that, okay? So, the other stuff is in limbo land. So, anyway, so what I wanted to start out by saying is that I think we've mentioned this in the past, but there was a period, I don't know if you really remember it all that well, in the mid-1990s, where, especially with the Next Generation, they were really doing this. There was a show, I think, The Scientific American Frontier. Remember that show on PBS?
Mm-hmm.
Actually, not a bad show. They did this show that was actually trying to prove that the science of Star Trek was real. And, of course, the first thing they brought up was the cell phones, the flip phones of the time, and the original TOS communicators. Yeah. And, of course, the flip phones at that time are these huge things that are antiques now. But, at that time, that was cutting edge. So these are the communicators. So, and they were talking about, but one of the guys was saying that, warp drive couldn't work in the future the way it does on Star Trek. You'd have to have this and have to have that. And I noticed that over the course of time, watching a lot of videos, people have put Star Trek into this position of, well, I don't care what they do to Star Trek now because it's just fiction. It's not real. Now, I don't know if this was hype. I mean, I've heard this repeated again and again, so I don't think so. Didn't Gene Roddenberry and people like Matt Jeffries in the 60s consult with people at NASA and JPL about technological developments at that time in order to reach some of their ideas?
I think so. I remember that they wanted to consult NASA for like Lost in Space, but Irwin Allen said, no, we don't want to get that accurate with it, and they were kind of turned off by it, so they left.
Yeah.
And so Star Trek, I think, because that show was on at the same time, they wanted to deal with, with things that were realistic theory, they didn't want to just make it so outlandish that it wouldn't seem
right,
possible.
They wanted to make it literally science fiction, emphasis on the science.
Yeah, so they wanted to have some basis in fact.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They wanted to say, well, we have a technology we have here in the 60s. How can we expand onto that in a 200, 300-year time frame?
That's right.
How could this evolve from where we are now? And, I'll go into it. A couple of times we expanded in a way that was unexpected early on.
That's right, yeah.
So I'm not going to doubt we have. But again, we talked about this before. All these little weird buttons and knobs we see on the TOS Connie, for example, how do we know just what and how much they can actually do?
Yeah, because, it doesn't look like any keyboard I've ever seen that's got these little colored knobs and everything on it. And, so how can you even say that by looking at that the thing is really limited? You just don't know. So I think another thing, too, is that, it's like what you said before, that, if you ever peeled the panels off of these control systems on the TOS, what you see underneath is like that really would look.
I'm going to kind of go into the limbo a little bit here about that, because that was kind of a point I made about Discovery.
Yeah.
These fancy 3D panels, how do you know if you don't move TOS, all the stuff isn't sitting under there?
Yeah, really.
Which means who knows what's sitting under the TNG stuff if that's the case? Who knows if there's all kinds of crazy little spirit stuff flying around?
Well, look at this. Let me just take this one panel. If you actually look at a picture of the helm and navigation system on Kirk's
on the Connie,
you'll see there's very little controls there. Very few. There's very few buttons there on that, but yet they can do all kinds of things. They can fire the weapons from there. They can steer the ship from there. They can target their phasers and everything from that. They do all kinds of things on this thing with just a few buttons on there.
Right, exactly.
How do you know what this thing does?
Again, that could be incredible science right there, and it fuels the imagination.
Yeah.
Fans for years have been writing. I'm sure there was fanfic in the 60s. I'd love to read 60s fanfic by people who were studying this, like what this actually did, what they thought it was going to be at the time. But, you know, you hear Sulu push a button and you just hear all these little noises. Who knows what all that stuff was?
And when they went into the movies, did you notice how they radically changed that? Where they filled the panel with all kinds of buttons.
Yeah, it was like 4 or 5 keyboards all over the place.
It was like, and there was just light. It looked like those, what do they call those, light bright things? You know,
the little knobs that light up, and like a light bright.
These buttons on it. I was like, well, Jesus. I mean, it looked like they actually took a step back.
Yeah, I always thought it funny. They turned those panels into like Christmas lights.
Yeah, they had
like
tons of
Christmas
them.
lights. Ding, 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 ding.
Yeah.
You know, but anyway, so we don't know the science of this, but there are some things we do know about science. So I'm going to give it a, well, actually, you had an idea. Do you want to go with yours first, or do you want me to go?
Okay, yeah. Well, this is just the theory, but I'm thinking.
Well, this is a theory about science of Star Trek, but it's something you wanted to put out. So.
I was figuring. Remember when they did Enterprise, and the captain would do a log, and he would always actually use the date.
Yeah, it's like Captain Starlog, July whatever 2152, whatever date it is.
I was kind of thinking, why are they doing this? Why are they going to this kind of format? It wasn't until after the show ended, and I was thinking, something. After all those time travel missions they just went through, in the time that was on, how do we know that Starfleet was like saying, we have to come up with a different way of measuring time, because we don't know if these ships, if they're going to get caught up into some kind of a temporal phenomena, how they're going to be able to, relate that to the ship's system some way that, they're not in the same time period or something. So maybe if they came up with a Stardate system, that would be more accurate than, say, using just plain old Earth time. This Stardate would be universal for everybody, so that way they would know exactly when something happened or occurred. And I was thinking, maybe that's why we started off with the cage with the Stardate system, because after everything, the temporal Cold War and all that stuff that went on Enterprise, I guess maybe that was what triggered it.
Well, unless, as they say, that stuff is classified in the canon universe. So.
Yeah, really.
I mean, because frankly, I'm surprised all that Suliban stuff and time travel. If that was put on the records, it would be amazing how different things would be in the future if everybody knew. I don't know that.
It'd be confusing in a way too. I mean,
Right. So, okay, I'm going to start. That's a scientific theory, and I'll mention a few of them. And it's a good scientific theory because a star date would kind of differentiate it from having a star log and using a conventional Earth date.
Yeah.
But see, I always figured it kind of like this, and this is just a theory I had, that the reason why they did that, where they went to star dates, is because obviously they're thinking in Earth terms. If you go to other planets orbiting other stars, their days are going to be different, their years are going to be different.
Yeah.
So they probably had to figure out a more uniform star date that would apply to space.
That's right.
Rather than, because obviously the Klingon homeworld isn't going to have a month of July.
Yeah.
The year might not even be 2052 on their planet.
Some worlds might have more than 12 months.
And they already know Vulcan doesn't. Vulcan has other kind of systems.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they can't just say, well, everybody's got to adopt an Earth thing. That would be exactly what Earth is trying to overcome at that point.
Yeah, because they're trying to make, have a federation where all these different worlds are together. So everybody
I was going to mention that as a scientific principle. That's really more of a sociological principle. Because, we could save that for like the social science of Star Trek, if you want to look at it that way. But, but it's a good idea. But one of the principles that I find interesting, and I don't think we've covered this before, and I found out the reason for it. I found it alternately funny too, was the transporter. And the reason why I mentioned the transporter is because I believe it came from the idea that originally Gene Roddenberry intended the Enterprise actually land on planets.
Yeah.
But when they built the ship, he couldn't figure out a way to get this thing to land.
Yeah.
There was a famous thing where he said he was on a plane with Wally Schirra, the Mercury astronaut, and Wally Schirra and him got to talking about his version of space and Wally's, and Wally said, "Why are you beaming everybody up and down all the time?" He said, "I couldn't figure out a way to land the ship." And I know it's kind of funny, but it was a good point. It's a good way to solve a problem. Could you imagine them having to go to blue alert every time they land on a planet? It would kind of take up half the episode, them landing and everything.
It would be expensive too. Even to just show it coming down.
That budget probably had a lot to do with it too. Yeah. But it did introduce a new idea about in the 60s and 50s before that, they had similar things in movies, but they didn't call it matter transport. They called it teleportation.
teleportation. Yeah.
which is a much more fiction-y principle. But the idea of the transporter was that there was something called a pattern buffer where they could actually, and the transporter, there are there's certain ways I wonder how it works, because they do certain things with transporters sometimes that I don't understand. Usually a person stands still and they just do their little beaming and they come down and they do what they're going to do. But I've seen people talking right in the middle of being transported.
Yeah.
Read Star Trek Wrath of Khan.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, so these people are being taken apart molecule by molecule, yet they can talk.
Yeah.
Can their mouths kind of move in some molecular state?
Yeah, I don't know.
Or are they caught in a matter stream where their bodies are actually intact, but their molecules are just phased out in a matter stream? Because that's how kind of the Next Generations felt. There was a matter stream, and the particles in their bodies were lighter and more malleable through the stream, but they weren't totally taken apart.
Yeah.
And just scattered, because if they were talking in there, that meant there had to be some cohesion.
Yes. Yeah.
Maybe it's less. I don't know, because if your minds were taken apart, there'd be no mouth to talk.
I keep going back to that episode where Barclay had that transporter psychosis.
Yeah, he was in there just like pretty whole.
And yeah, so they made it look like, he could see what was going on in the matter stream.
Kind of half dazed. Like,
yeah.
Like he's kind of partially there.
Yeah. And then remember that episode on TOS where was it Kirk, McCoy, and Sulu, and I can't remember the other guy's name, but they were beaming down to this hollow asteroid, and as they were beaming down, this woman appears in the transporter room and kills the transporter operator, but they couldn't leave the pad because they were in the
Unata one?
Yeah. And they were in the process of beaming off the ship, and they saw what happened, but they couldn't do anything. It was too late.
Yeah, so, I think I know how the transporter works now that I think about it. I think what happens is that for a brief moment, your atoms are taken apart, and then you exist pretty whole in the matter stream. And then when you're put wherever you're going to be, planet, ship, hollow, asteroid, whatever it is, if you're beamed out into space and killed, which has happened a couple times, your atoms are assembled the same way. So maybe the reason they could talk during transporter is because they were in that phase where they were pretty whole.
Yeah.
So
because for them it seems like an instantaneous thing. They leave one place and they're beaming into another, so it's instantaneous for them.
Right, but like I said, it maybe a fraction of a second they're all taken apart.
Yeah.
Because if you notice this stuff, well, again, I know people say it shouldn't matter, it's science fiction. Well, it does matter. Star Trek made it very clear they wanted to consult and make this real science. So I'm treating it as real science in that world, in that.
From the very beginning, whenever even the props, everybody tried to figure out how the props work. Well, we figured out something of it, right? We got cell phones and stuff like that now. It's when you apply, your current knowledge into something, that's when it starts to become part of reality.
Right. It's called inventiveness.
First hoverboard,
It's called inventiveness. It's called, deep thinking, really.
That's how we used to do it before there was TV. People just sitting there thinking things, and all of a sudden they invent the light bulb.
Even after TV. I mean, there was TV when Steve Jobs came around and Bill Gates came around.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's just, I think it's when you become, kind of cynical and jaundiced and think, oh, science fiction couldn't really happen. I remember when I was younger, my late grandfather, I feel bad because he can't be here to defend himself. He thought that Star Trek, he looked at it like somebody in the 1920s might view the silent movies, that they're nothing like real life, and you mustn't believe them. I would love to have him come up here and say, hey, Grandpa. Remember that from Star Trek you said never happened?
Yeah.
I would love to do that, because he was like, everything had to be totally realistic in whatever year you were there.
Yeah.
Not, kind of like Odo was, remember, where everybody was dreaming up all these things, and he thought, well, people dream of things they'll never do and places they'll never go instead of paying attention to their real lives, kind of cynical. That's how my grandfather could be. And I think there's a lot of people out there who are like that in the world. They look at science fiction and they point to the fiction side of it.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't call it science fiction for nothing. I mean, science fiction isn't just people in spaceships. It's scientific principles set in a fictional world. And Star Trek...
I had the benefit of my father being a person that used to fix televisions and VCRs and stuff like that. And he did that right up until the first flat screen TV started coming out, and he tried to tackle on fixing those things. And My father never even graduated high school, but yet he took a correspondence course in fixing TVs and stuff like that, and he became, very good at what he did, over the years. But watching him take these things apart and seeing the guts of what's in there, I'm like, wow, that's all that's inside of this thing, and it can do all that. It's like, so it made things possible in my mind to see that we could do things.
Right, because a lot of the things inside these TVs and stuff are electrical. And see, my grandfather was a tinkerer, took things apart all the time. That's why I'm wondering, was he just taking them apart and thinking of them technically, or did he ever imagine what's going on in that unseen world we don't see when this is working?
Yeah.
Because like I said, is it just sitting there, or there's something going on in there, this electrical reaction that's beyond our visual range?
Yeah.
Could you imagine if, like a Geordie LaForge, you have that visor, and you looked at that, and you looked at a TV screen, what kind of electromagnetic stuff you might be seeing? Yeah. It could be a whole crazy world.
Yeah.
The waves going everywhere, and zoom, 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 and but anyway, I'm gonna get to Geordie a little later. But anyway, I'm gonna take turns here. That was one of my favorite principles, was the transporter, because obviously they don't have to land every ship, or they don't have to take a shuttle everywhere. Even in Enterprise, where they use shuttle pods a lot more often, they were afraid of transporters. They still had them. They still started using them, even if there were problems with them. So
yeah.
And you saw it with them, it's like, oh well, we love this, but we're kind of afraid of it. So it was a weird dichotomy. So, a favorite of yours? What Star Trek scientific principle?
Well, one of the things that I like, but I think they overthink it, is the cloaking device.
Yeah.
Now, if I understand warp theory as the way they use it on their nacelles, it creates a gravity field ahead of the ship, which essentially pulls the ship into faster than light velocities. Okay, that same gravity field also can create a bubble around the ship. Now, doing that, having it do that, when you look at a black hole, okay, you don't really see it. It's just a dark spot, basically. And there's a lot of gravity.
Starless spot, yeah.
That's right. There's a lot of gravity around that thing. So there's no light can actually come through it. I'm thinking, well, couldn't they use sort of the same concept by using the warp nacelles to create a cloaking field around the ship? Because it bends light. It's bending light around the ship. Because you're using a gravity bubble to actually
create an artificial quantum singularity, as they call it.
Well, not so much a singularity, but just, a field around the ship that causes light to bend away, in different ways around it, because it's using gravity.
Didn't Data call a black hole a quantum singularity once?
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that, you don't want to try to create an actual...
no, not a real one, but like an artificial one that just kind of hides the ship behind a material thing.
Yeah, just to create a warp bubble around the ship, and enough to where the light that's going, it's trying to come to it is actually reflected off, and that creates it. So they wouldn't actually have to have a cloaking device. All they would have is to modify their warp nacelles to be able to emit a gravity field around the ship to actually create that.
It's funny, I'm wondering, is a cloaking device something that just generates that field, or is it actually like an element that makes that kind of thing you're talking about possible?
It's one of those things that they don't really explain. It's like why the dilithium crystals are needed, for warp drive and stuff like that. They don't really get into too much detail with that either. And I'm wondering, well, what exactly does the cloaking device do?
You mentioned two scientific principles right there. One of them I was going to get into a little bit later, but we'll get the dilithium crystals a little after.
Yeah. So, it's like, to me, it seemed like, because gravity is like the big thing with Star Trek, is gravity this, gravity that, and it's essential for their traveling through space. And I'm thinking, well, from what I understand about gravity and how we look at it through the telescope and from today's science, is that it can bend light, it can do all these things. And it's like, well, if that's what they're trying to do on Star Trek by hiding a ship, then obviously the warp field that they create to move the ship along could also be used to create a sort of a bubble around it. And that way the light simply will not penetrate through that. It would to the naked eye, would just seem like you're looking at the same star field, but behind that field is the ship sitting there, because that warp bubble is hiding it.
Right. Well, they kind of hinted on that principle, but on a more metaphysical level in Next Generation, where Wesley created that warp bubble and it literally created this alternate dimension.
Yeah.
Where thought could kind of manifest itself. But the thing is it couldn't a similar technology be used to actually hide a ship, like you said?
Well, are you saying like having a cloaking device?
Well, no, not a cloaking device, but like an actual, maybe pre-destination warp field or something, like where they, where it wasn't as formed enough to be a full warp field, but where it could create that energy that could bend around the ship and just, hide it, like you said.
Yeah, it's essentially what I was trying to say is that, they're not actually creating the warp field to move the ship, but they're just using it to
Like I said,
hide
like a
it.
variant of the warp bubble, only that doesn't put you in another dimension. It just hides your ship.
That's right. Yeah.
Another type of warp bubble. That would be an interesting theory, and somebody in some fan fiction may think of that someday. But
Yeah.
I mean, rather than have a device
Like
as a catalyst to it.
Yeah, it just seems like it was like too much to, say, well, we had to make this special device to help do that. It's like, well, you've already got the device, I think. To be able to travel at faster than light speeds, you should be able to do that with your warp nacelles and not have to.
If you think about it, look at the Enterprise D. That passed with some sort of energy where it started creating its own life form.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I mean, who knows how powerful these starships are? We just don't tap into all of their systems.
That's right.
I mean, there were times where, they had that TOS Connie going at really fast speeds, and it just wasn't built to withstand it.
Yeah.
But it could do it.
Yeah.
So, so that ship actually could pack a punch. And also, I'm going to mention this again, the Connie could take the equivalent energy of 90 proton torpedoes. So that had some power. I mean, that ship had some power. So, and then there were volleys that could have destroyed it. So,
yeah.
a few more such volleys. So, multiply 90 by 3.
Yeah.
That ship would take a wallop, So, yeah, these ships had some abilities that, were kind of, otherworldly in a lot of ways. And, so who knows about how some of these things worked. I kind of alluded to this technology, and it wasn't introduced till the Next Generation. But it's a relatively minor tech because it's only really used once. But I thought, when the Next Generation first came out, I heard LeVar Burton was going to be in it, and he said he's playing a blind guy. And I said, a blind guy in a starship being a navigator, how's that going to work? And then they showed him with that visor on, and I said, okay, so he's got special glasses that help him see. But then when they explained it, it's like it taps into his brain waves, this visor, and allows him to experience the electromagnetic heat map of everything.
Yeah, the spectrum. Yeah.
He sees in a heat map. So, I mean, I know that obviously using an electromagnetic camera probably can be expensive, but I would love to have seen, like, here's what Geordi's seeing more. I would love to have, because we saw it in the first season, but I would love to have seen how Geordi's look at the world was. I mean, what did engineering look like to him? When he looked at the engines, what did he see?
Yeah.
I mean, everything had an aura around it or a lot of energy. I mean, what did his visor show him when he looked around him?
Apparently, I mean, he could see almost through solid objects a little bit too, and he could see great distances.
Right. I mean, remember that episode we mentioned last week, or did we mention it? Home Soil, where we see this it's like a little light, like a little LED light. And he's looking at this thing and he's amazed. Like, I see rhythms and color variations, and I'm not seeing any of that.
Yeah, so it's like a microscope.
So again, why is Geordi seeing this magical world of the EMs that we don't see?
Yeah.
And I just thought I would love to have like a what is Geordi seeing thing here. Like, what he can see rhythm, he can see color variation, he can see harmonies. It's almost like being on LSD. Your senses are all different.
Yeah.
So I always thought that Geordi must have had these incredible senses due to that visor. And I'm like, well, no wonder the guy feels pain. His senses are all hyperstimulated.
Yeah.
That makes sense why he's feeling pain using that. But he didn't want to give it up because who would want to give up that kind of ability even if they're feeling pain?
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't want to feel pain all the time. But I mean, I could put a button on these things and see in the EM spectrum. Of course, there was a flaw to it. He said it was hard to filter out extraneous information.
Yeah.
So it was something he learned. But I just found that a fascinating idea to help the blind, to give them the ability to use their natural brain waves, which they still had, to be able to perceive the EM spectrum through a technological device.
And if I remember correctly, and this happened a while back, I think they did try to use a concept like that to help someone see, and it worked. For somebody, they put something that went right into the optic areas of the eyes, and actually what they did is they bypassed the eyeball, went right into the brain itself.
Right.
And they hooked up.
What Geordi did too. They had a device that hooked into his brain.
Yeah. They had this thing that actually.
But they didn't put over his head. They didn't put it over their head, did they? Like they did Geordi.
No, it looked like regular like sunglasses or something like that. And all of a sudden he could start to see shapes and stuff like that. So we're very close to being able to give sight to the blind right now. I mean, technology is
And,
really.
I gotta wonder, if that's the case, was Geordi the first person who had a device like that? Is that actually very old technology in their world?
Yeah.
I mean, you gotta wonder because, I would think the humanity in the future would kind of work on developing inventions that actually help them rather than hinder them. I mean, you hear so many times these days saying that, oh, they're just trying to take more of your money so they can keep you sick and give you drugs. And I kind of see the future, since they don't have that kind of world anymore, that they invent devices that actually help people rather than keep them submissive.
Yeah.
So, I think that the advisor was always, in fact, when I was younger, I actually kind of had this pipe dream that I'd be the guy who invents something like that.
I mean, we're at the crest right now of being able to give hearing back to the deaf. I mean, we can do that to a degree now.
And you gotta wonder, who knows? With deaf people, I mean, they have that Riva guy, but are they gonna have some hypo spray and start it where they're not deaf anymore? I mean, how do you? I mean, you gotta wonder. I mean, and these are really wondrous possibilities. I mean, there was even a thing where alternately, and I noticed they mentioned this. Either Bones was joking. Bones said he couldn't cure a cold a couple of times.
Yeah.
So either he was just joking around, or they still had colds in the 23rd century. Yet in TNG, Wesley said colds were a disease people used to get. So in some places, either Jones was making a joke, or in some 100 years' time, people didn't get colds anymore.
Yeah, some way.
Oh, yes, and Crusher made that clear. She said people had in charge of the brain in the past. They didn't understand pain. They were suffering from things like the common cold.
Yeah, when they was talking about headaches, right? That's
right, and she was talking about them like those are old things.
Yeah.
I mean, like as if somebody said, "Oh, you have Black Death or something." Now, like, why do you have a disease that's like hundreds of years old? I mean, or you have cholera, really? I mean, but so the shit about headaches like this, that's some old disease that nobody gets anymore.
Yeah,
that's some old problem. So obviously there are great medical advances. So I think the visor goes along with the medical advances in the future. And Pulaski even said she could clone eyes for Geordi, but he didn't want to do that.
Yeah, that was kind of an odd thing to throw.
Well, the mortality rate was really high, though. She said that if it doesn't work, you can't go back.
Yeah.
So I think
he could only do it, and there was no second chance.
So if he was, so basically, it meant if it didn't work, he couldn't use the visor anymore. So that would mean kind of giving up his career. So
I guess the eyes that he ended up with in the movies, they weren't clone eyes, were they? They're more like a higher version of the visor.
In that Future Imperfect, fake Future, didn't he have cloned implants in that?
Yeah, I mean, they had like a different colored, or they were like maybe like a blue or something. They put like these contact lenses, colored contact lenses in the actor's eyes there.
I'm talking about the one in Future Imperfect where he wasn't wearing a visor and he said, "I just got cloned implants." It was that one where there was that.
Oh yeah. Oh, okay. I know what you're.
Yeah, I think he had cloned implants in that one, but that was a fake reality, so I don't really count that. But yeah, in All Good Things, he had those little same contact lensy kind of things.
Yeah.
Maybe they found a way to integrate the visor into a contact lens type of thing, kind of like LASIK surgery. And maybe they just to give him more of a realistic kind of thing, where he didn't need the visor and maybe he didn't feel the pain.
Yeah, it really added a different look to him in First Contact when we see him without his visor for the first time, actually in a whole episode or a whole thing, where he's not wearing it, because we actually get to see LeVar's whole face.
I mean, what it looked like. I'm just saying that it was interesting to see the whole Geordi rather than just his cataract covered eyes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure as an actor on the show for 7 years, he probably would have liked to have been able to do that without wearing the visor, because he said he couldn't really emote facially, feelings and stuff like that with this thing over his face. It made it hard to try to.
Yeah, and if you notice with Geordi a lot, he often had to use a lot of physical head language, like he would shake his head a lot.
Yeah.
Rather than use his eyes. And he couldn't do those little Bones eye raises or Spock eye raises because you couldn't really see it because the visor was covering it.
That's right.
He'd have to shake his head sometimes, or he'd have to point, or he'd have to talk a lot or move. He kind of had to use his body and his voice as a way to project certain ideas.
That's right.
Which blind people do. They find ways to do that. Even though he isn't blind, he can see better than everybody else on the ship can, theoretically. But, he found other ways to compensate. And he even said he uses natural sensors in different ways, so that's probably why he felt pain, because, well, Geordi's a pretty independent guy. But anyway, so you could tell he had that spirit, where it's like, well, I may have to use this thing, but I'm still going to use what I've got. He's still kind of that kind of person.
I wonder, after all this time, if he's actually able to see better than he did originally when we first meet him in Encounter at Farpoint, if the new eyes and all that he has now, you can actually see a little better of what it looks like with human eyes than just that color spectrum that he was looking at before. You know, they don't really say.
Well, we saw, I think, in Insurrection, didn't we see him kind of seeing that way still?
Yeah, it looked like it was better, though, than the way they were showing it on the view screen. Because remember, they were trying that thing where they could project what you could see on the ship screen.
And speaking of the Geordi visor, this is kind of, novel canon. But you've always often talked about in the motion picture, novelization, not the movie. They had this thing, some implant or something in Kirk's head where he could talk to people or something.
Well, yeah, not so much talk, but just he could get emergency imagery or something from Starfleet that was supposed to cue him on or brief him basically
about
what. About V'ger. That was like a quick briefing you would get in his mind, and that would be like, well, now he's recalled back to duty, so he's got to answer this thing that he gets, this briefing he just got from Starfleet, which is how they wrote it out in the book. And in the movie, the only part of that they actually kept was actually the encounter the Klingons had with V'ger, which was actually what we were seeing that through the eyes of the satellite, which obviously was transmitted to Starfleet where Kirk got that. So actually that's more like what Kirk was seeing in his mind, seeing that whole battle with the Klingons and everything. That's what he was actually seeing in his mind while he was
right. But to us, it seemed like it was part of the movie, but in the book, it was just basically, that was something that they established was Kirk was seeing it in his head.
That's right.
From the Starfleet briefing.
Yeah.
Now that I think about it, that kind of technology could be really destroy you mentally. I mean, if you were seeing things and it malfunctioned, and
because it just came on him like that. He was just sitting, in a vehicle.
That could be a problematic technology, having a thing in your head that would pop up information.
What if you're driving and all of a sudden this thing kicks in and it's like, oh, now you crash?
I mean, imagine driving and seeing a Facebook thing pop up in your head.
Yeah. I mean, that's got to be distracting as hell. I mean, you get that in that fashion, no warning.
You can see, this person in a sex change. Thing come up on your Facebook, or this meme or something. And imagine if you were driving along and somebody posted up a Harlem Shake video and you were just, I don't know, I mean, yeah, they posted, turn your little mind probe off when you're driving, like your cell phone, that sort of thing.
And the funny thing is, the Spock kind of got that. That's how he knew about V'ger, was he got some kind of telepathic.
Right. Yeah.
Which in itself was just like Kirk in a way.
Well, with Vulcans, I can see them being so disciplined and so logical that it wouldn't affect them because they're telepaths anyway. But with humans have all this emotional baggage and all these fears, and unless Kirk was much more disciplined than he seemed to be, it was just weird that would be a thing. So the Geordi technology I could see because it was helping a person without an ability.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was a technology that I really enjoyed. So I guess you've kind of bought some other things into that. So now it's your turn. Okay.
The other thing that I like was when you have like a communicator. I know people today like to say, well, our cell phones are better today, or do more things today than the communicators do on Star Trek.
And how do we know what they did?
Yeah, it's like, okay, well, let's just break that down for a second. Can you call somebody in Russia?
I mean, they're calling people from a planet's surface in space. That's way farther away than Russia.
Yeah. The Enterprise is actually your cell phone service, okay? And through them, they can connect you to anywhere in the galaxy.
Right. Not only that, but that communicator, even the TOS one, is connected to a device that can take apart your molecules.
Yeah.
Can our cell phone say, okay, beam me up?
Can you put two cell phones together and make them whistle and blow up rock?
Boom!
Cause an avalanche, like a rock, like in Friday's Child. Remember that when they had the on there? Boom!
Yeah. Can it's like, can you use your cell phones as like fire sticks, like, really? So, but I think it's just the fact that flips, people think that, well, the cell phones are better now. Well, again, like I said, just because something looks awesome and something looks amazing, I mean, a person might look at, could you imagine like somebody like Janeway looking at this thing, or Cisco and them, and it looks so sophisticated, they're like, oh, look at the stone knives and bear skins.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who
knows what those pads in TNG could do compared to that?
Yeah. Well, God, the pads themselves are connected right into the ship system. They could actually pilot Voyager through a pad if they wanted to. They just connect it because everything on those ships is all remote control. Basically, those panels aren't connected to wires like the Reliant. And there are no wires.
Into the Reliant.
Everything is remote control. It's like you're walking around with all these little remote controls, and some part of the bridge is actually sending the signal back to where it's going to do.
Here's a little fun education I wanted to pass by you about the communicators, which is a technology that I thought was really cool too. These long-range devices, because communication is always very important, and the more you can communicate, the more you can learn.
Yeah,
that's just my thing. So I wanted to bring to mind. I've heard people say that the communicators from this era, oh, that's Bluetooth. Only no. Again, this little thing can lock onto a device that can take you apart molecule by molecule.
And just a side note here, they do have those in a Bluetooth thing. They just connect to your phone.
But again, can you imagine if you get a little Bluetooth thing like that, the car looking at it like, oh, this is a nice simulacra, I mean, but can yours beam me up?
Yeah, I mean, theirs was actually monitoring their vital signs.
Right, exactly. There's a lot of stuff in this thing.
Yeah.
It's all miniaturized, but it's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, it does a lot more. Yeah.
I mean, I can honestly see Geordi looking at the back of it and the communicator you get now and saying, oh, you got a couple gigabytes in there. That's cute.
Cute?
I mean, just a gigabyte in there. To be like, what's a gigabyte? That's the whole thing you were using? Like, remember Worf on the Next Generation thing? They're locking lasers on us.
Lasers.
And they're like, oh, lasers, that's cute, Like, who uses lasers anymore? Lasers like, oh my God, that's so dangerous. Then I'm like, oh, lasers.
What's the regulation say? What are we supposed to do if they are just lasers?
Yeah, it's like, oh, the laser light show, lasers, They got really powerful weapons on that ship, so lasers. So that's why when people say, oh, there's Bluetooth, these aren't. If you had somebody from that time look at this, they'd probably say, oh, no, it's not what we were using. I mean, you open a communicator up in that world and open up a Bluetooth, they're not anything alike.
Yeah.
Which, can I go to one of mine now? Because it kind of leads into this.
Okay.
Because it's a technology that was only mentioned exactly once, if I remember, but it fascinates me to no end. Maybe from the communicator. The translator.
Translator, yes.
What is this thing? They mention it once, and it's the key to all this technology. Yeah. You wouldn't have starships or transporters or communicators or tricorders or phasers if it wasn't for this translator that was important. And you mentioned it only once in the whole show.
What is it, a wizard? Like the translator wizard,
What is this, like the Xena device? Oh, well, this worked weird. The translator did it.
Has anybody on Discovery heard that term being thrown around on that?
Well, I know that's in the limbo place right now. But I would love for them in this current to throw the translator and like, this is a big deal, this translator. Yeah. This is what a translator
they never mentioned it on Enterprise, as far as I know.
I just have this funny image that the translator is like a little tiny ball bearing. It's like you put it in there and it's like, this can do all kinds of things. This thing is good.
Yeah.
Work, And like, the translator is the key to all our technology. What is this super device? My gosh, what is this? It's in everything on the ship and you don't talk about it.
But when they say all technology, I mean, are they including the 20th century technology with that?
Well, he's saying all the technology they use.
Oh.
So it's like, okay, why didn't we hear about the translator in Enterprise?
Yeah.
Make sure the translators are installed, whatever those are, Yeah, and like, I would love to know about this miracle technology that would give you the energy to transport matter, to go past the speed of light, to create all this energy. I kind of figured it was kind of like a futuristic version of the transistor, which is a technology that was kind of similar in the 1960s that allowed a lot of different things to work.
Yeah.
Radios and cars and stuff like that. So maybe he just said, well, trans sounds cool, so I'll just say translator.
Yeah.
But still, that was such a relevant thing. You never heard anybody in TNG mention translator.
Yeah.
I would love to know how this magical device works. I honestly would love to know, because it's like you mentioned this at the end of this episode about gangsters, and so you have to communicate it with them, and it's like, you didn't say, well, they could open it up and figure things out. We said, they'll find out how the translator works.
Yeah.
Ooh, the translator! Oh my goodness! What's a translator?
Yeah, and what are they saying? In 100 years, they're going to be out there exploring.
In 100 years, and you almost expect them to go deep, deep, deep.
So what are we going to see? Are we going to see like some kind of an episode on a Star Trek show where we run into those people there, and now they have their own Starfleet and they got their own
oceans?
Or what about the Roman Empire that had the 20th century technology? Are they gonna venture out into space and become like a mirror universe in the real universe? I mean, like the Romans. I mean, because they got the technology apparently to launch rockets. So
So
they
yeah,
could
I mean,
building spaceships.
these are little, they always rode off into the sunset in TOS, but there are all these little stories that we didn't really complete. Well, we did complete Spacey, so
they could be future problems for stories,
TOS, now theoretically they could spend the whole Next Generation doing that, going back and solving problems Kirk created, but when they did, they kind of failed at it, but they did their own thing, and usually they completed their story arcs most of the time.
Yeah.
But with TOS, they just kind of left a lot of people to kind of do. I know that's part of the Prime Directive thing too. But that translator, they were so earnest about it at the end. It's like, oh, we never discussed this translator ever again.
Yeah.
You never hear O'Brien saying the station in front of us, the translator is broken.
Yeah.
Abandoned station.
Well, the one thing they did bring up in the new shows is the self-sealing stem bolt, and that was another thing they never even.
The stem bolt. It's like, this is super important, but what does it even do?
Yeah.
And you can see them. They have these things that come out of them. And it's like, well, this is people want these stem balls. Like, what is this, like a rivet or some sort of
apparatus?
Yeah, but people obviously want these things. But even O'Brien was an engineer. Like, what do these things do? And he's an engineer. I mean, he should know what a stem bolt is. Like, this is some experimental alien technology I don't know a lot about. I guess I got to study this or whatever,
Yeah.
It's very Cardassian, so you figure it's a Cardassian thing.
Could be, yeah.
So, I mean, you pop it and these little things come out.
Yeah.
I'm surprised Playmates Toys didn't put out one of them, like, hey, kids, buy a self-sealing stem bolt.
That'd have been so easy to make for
I don't know what you do with it, but it's fun,
Almost like a slinky, it's like...
It goes in and out, it does its thing, It's a stem bolt. Yeah, it does stuff. Kids like it. And kids don't know what it is, The stem bolt, I don't even know what kind of science that is. It's a thing that works. It does what it's supposed to do. We don't know what it is. Episode device. But you're right. The translator is something I like to know how it works, too, because that was a big deal for like a whole episode. Actually, didn't they ever say that a lot in Deep Space Nine? I heard stem balls over and over again, and everybody's like, what are these things?
Yeah, it wasn't until much later when they actually show us one, but they kept saying that over a lot of times, the stem bolt, and it was like, everybody knew at that time, but when they actually did that episode, nobody knew what a stem bolt was.
You never saw on Deep Space Nine anything repairing anything with a stem bolt.
Yeah.
So I wonder if they were used to build homes or residencies or repair things or, and they made a big deal. They're self-sealing. Like, there are non-self-sealing stem bolts that are kind of crappy, so they have these self-sealing ones. So it's like, these are obviously new and improved stem bolts.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, so it's out of the blue kind of Trek science where you don't know, like you said, like Slinky. Like, for all you know, it might have been used for kitchen supplies. I don't know. It might have been off-the-wall use because, I don't know. It's just, but the stem bolts, we never had an articulation for what it was. Whereas the translator, they distinctly said it was a key to all their technology.
Yeah.
I was like, well, geez, why isn't everything you do and you just leave them on a planet?
Yeah.
Really, I mean, is this translator so important? Shouldn't it be part of the ship and not be included in a communicator you might leave on a planet? I mean, sheesh, like maybe a translator interface, but not a translator itself.
Yeah.
But he said they'll find out how the translator works. So I don't know if that meant that there wasn't one in there, but whatever it is.
Yeah.
But that technology always fascinating. Like, what is this miracle technology that makes everything work?
That's right.
Not too many episodes later, Scotty is telling those Sargon aliens, remember them?
Yep.
That they were building this android. How's something that looks like a little drop of glue going to make this all work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's like, well, a few episodes ago, we were supposed to believe that something inside a communicator was the key to all your technology.
Yeah.
So it's just weird, unexplained science. But I'd love to know how that thing worked.
Yeah.
Just because it's so vague. It was like it just came out of the blue. Like I said, maybe it's a stem bolt of TOS. Where it's important for the moment, but after that, who cares?
Yeah.
I mean, now that I think about it, didn't Chekhov throw like a Klingon phaser or something at some guy in the 20th century?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. On Star Trek 4, it was the.
Couldn't that have presumably had a translator in it?
Well, for Klingon technology, I don't know, but
Well, if it did, then he left the translator with a 20th century military guy.
even if it was no translator, it's still technology they don't have, and they could have took it apart and figured out how to make a phaser.
You just kind of answer why the Star Trek timeline keeps changing right there.
Every time they go back in time, they're changing the future. Even though they're trying to save it, they're changing it in different ways.
Well, like I said, if we did an episode on time travel, it would be a maelstrom of mess, I swear.
Well, I was arguing with somebody about, the Terminator series and why every movie seems to step on the previous one. And
isn't the key to that time travel too?
Yes. And I said that every time the movie involves time travel, they're altering the events that will take place after it. First, the war was going to start in this year, and then the next time was going to be in a later year. It's because every time they go back in time and they change subtle things, it changes the outcome in the end. And that's what people don't understand when they're watching the movies, is they're forgetting that. It's like the Back to the Future thing. No matter how subtle they changes, they're big enough to where they can alter things in the future.
Even though whenever they go back in time and come back in TOS, everything seems normal.
Yeah, and in their minds it is normal because they actually change themselves in a way when they do that. Because in their mind it looks all correct.
It looks normal to us, but
yeah.
And maybe subtle things they change, we don't realize it.
Yeah.
Little subtle things. But who knows? And now I'm hearing what they're doing now is that time travel is doing very big things, but that could happen.
I'm more interested in seeing Star Trek do these interdimensional voyages, not time travel, but seeing different universes. Going into different sorts of.
Couldn't you say we're kind of doing that now?
Well, yeah, sort of. Well, Star Trek itself has become a different.
I'm winking.
Yeah.
That we're kind of in multi dimensions now, just not saying it, but.
I'm just saying, let's just start with one dimension, in the canon dimension, and then we'll just have a ship that travels.
We have the mirror universe
instead of time travel.
And then we could have, like Star Trek. Dimension 4 or something, like we're traveling between these different universes and
where they actually expand the Federation to include other federations and other dimensions and stuff like that, when they actually broaden.
That's a very big series.
Well, Marvel's they got the balls to do it. They're doing.
They could do that series. Here's Star Trek, the multi-dimensional version. 5 different versions of CBS All Access in different dimensions.
There might be a CBS All Access that's actually sound, in another dimension that you don't have to pay to watch it.
Right, exactly. You have to pay for this one, but you don't have to pay for that one, and that one's not even called CBS anymore. So here we are.
And maybe they can integrate these dimensions that they like into the main canon line, and everybody just
right. We can go all over the place with this multi-dimensional Star Trek.
Where showing up and saying, "What have you guys done?
You put yourself into multiple universes."
You guys, you just don't know enough to leave things alone. You continue all up in arms here.
It's like, we're still here. You screw your universe right up.
And they take one with them to show what the universe looks like now according to how we would see it, and it's a tornado and going through a dust bowl and everything.
So you invented a whole new metaphysical principle for Star Trek to live in right there. This crazed, multi-dimensional mess of a universe.
You think time travel was bad? Wait till you see this.
They kind of alluded to that in Parallels. Remember where Worf was jumping all over the place?
Yeah.
Imagine if we were doing that all the time, jumping between different universes.
No wonder Worf wasn't going, the one bridge! You want to start your has one bridge!
Yeah, like, this is one Enterprise, one bridge!
No wonder he wasn't losing his mind going through all those different dimensions.
He's sitting there and like, oh, well, Troy, he's still married. He's not like, well, one Troy, one marriage.
Yeah.
He was freaking out on the Yamato.
Oh, God, yeah.
This is not right. It's supposed to be one ship, one bridge, one bridge. Turbo lift doors.
And that was just because he couldn't accept the idea of a second bridge. But imagine seeing a multi-dimensional universe, how he'd flip out over that.
One Enterprise, one Worf. Yeah, that could be Gonzo. That could be just out there. So okay, back to science. I can actually talk about what is your what's your next favorite principle in not the Star Trek multi-crazy verse we just talked about, but the real one that makes sense.
Well, I always wondered about the plasma torpedo the Romulans are using. Is it actually an energy thing or is it a liquid?
Yeah, what? Now that I think about it, we've talked about weapons here. there's a lineage of weapons that has never really been explained if you look at it a certain way. I mean, there was an episode of Voyager, I'm not going to get off subject, where they have this planet, if you remember it, that's orbiting in such a way where it's evolving really, really quickly.
Yeah, the time doesn't move.
And, the Voyager just gapped there, but they're evolving like hundreds of years per second or something.
Yeah.
And at one point, they're hitting the ship with plasma torpedoes.
Mm.
But they don't really specify if that's an earlier version of the photon torpedo or a late. They never really established what the plasma torpedo is in terms of advancement.
Yeah, and on TOS, I guess we were supposed to accept that it's some new weapon that's even stronger than a torpedo, because it, only a couple of shots and they could knock down a whole station.
Right, and in Enterprise they were using spatial torpedoes, which were those just like atomic weapons?
Oh, I don't know. That's a good question, because
they weren't photonic, and they were calling them photonic torpedoes, like they were giving this big formal name.
Yeah, like it was like just at the it's like they didn't get photon torpedoes till they actually met with the Klingon ships, and maybe that's how they got that technology somehow.
The Klingons had photon torpedoes first.
Yeah, that's at least how they laid it out on Enterprise. Was that
we had quantum torpedoes, and I really have no idea how those things work. They were just out there.
I'm thinking it's like 0-point energy, when it detonates, and it's not exploding, it's imploding, or something like that. I guess I don't know.
It's probably it's a totally different thing than photon, I imagine.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if that's like some sort of reverse time device.
I don't know.
I mean, close to that Crenham time ship stuff.
They make it seem like they're very, very expensive to create, and not every ship has them. Only the capital ships carry them.
Well, we use the term expensive. I never hear that really mentioned in the Star Trek universe. But Quark said they were expensive.
Yeah, it's like they're so advanced that it requires more resource to build these things.
Right. So with the Ferengi, it's cost a lot to buy the quantum torpedoes.
Yeah.
I think, didn't you go back to the Roswell and say, I can give you quantum torpedoes, a little more expensive, but worth it?
Yeah.
Implying that they're a high commodity, but they probably take, because when I was younger with photon torpedoes in general, I didn't realize the ship had a limited amount of them.
Yeah.
I thought they just generated them. I didn't realize they had a stock of them.
Yeah.
Because you saw them firing them. I just thought they were just something they beam them up or something and they just appear. I didn't realize they had a stock.
Which is why a lot of people have the misconception that the Klingon bird of prey that we see in Star Trek 3 was using photon torpedoes. It wasn't. It was using plasma weapons, because when you see it firing, you're not seeing a solid torpedo.
Yeah, an energy ball more.
Yeah, it's like it's forming the energy and spitting it out.
You saw this little thing turning and this thing popping out. So
because there's no room in there to stockpile torpedoes.
Yeah, that's so tiny. How could you store more than one torpedo in a ship like that?
And the one that General Chang was using in Star Trek 6 actually had torpedoes, but it was a bigger. Wasn't that
like a Vought class ship?
Yeah, that wasn't a regular bird of prey.
Rel was the one in Star Trek 3, right?
Yeah, the 1 and 3 was just the regular small one. Rel, yeah.
And Chang was a larger Vought.
Yeah.
Does the Vought, wouldn't that be equivalent size of the Connie?
Yeah, I guess. I mean,
around the size of a D7 or a Tenga.
As far as I know, there's supposed to be 3 sizes to those.
Yeah, isn't there one about near the Galaxy class size, a huge one?
Well, none of the Klingon birds of prey are really size basically, and not very big. It's just they're just
exponentially bigger.
Yeah, I mean, they're proportionally bigger, but they're designed the same way, but I don't think any of them are like really gigantic.
Well, if you look at the charts, the Vought class is definitely the size of the Connie. It's a huge ship.
Yeah.
So that we know. So the third one, how much bigger could it be?
I don't know.
Because,
I don't think they ever show that one. I don't think they ever show that one.
If you look at the bird of prey, the Rel class, that ship is only about the size of, I don't think it's even as big as the Oberth.
No, yeah, I would think it would be about a little smaller than the Oberth, yeah.
Yes, it's barely a shuttle. It's a little ship. Only about a dozen people.
A little bit larger than, well, at least lengthwise, maybe a little bit larger than a runabout.
I mean, the front is probably the size of a runabout. The front is probably a little thing.
Yeah.
But the back of it is probably the biggest part.
Yeah, because that's where the engine section is.
Right, there's nobody back there. That's all
Yeah.
electronics or wing or that giant bulky warp engine that has back there. But anyway, because it doesn't have warp nacelles, there's this big thing back there.
Yeah, I mean, there's really no room really for anything else, but whatever drives the ship, and power and things.
Unless you assume the wing is a warp nacelle.
Yeah.
Which
So,
is,
I figure those things are only designed for like one mission, and it's, a go and come back.
yeah, they kind of like kamikaze planes, and they're not designed for long term.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think they send a bird of prey to study scientific anomaly.
No, no.
I mean, not the Klingons are much into that,
That's what
but
they would send the D7s out for.
or they wouldn't send them out to fight a major battle. They would just be a tactical ship.
Yeah, or like an escort.
And if they were fighting a major battle, they'd probably send a Katenga out, or a D7 out, or later on a Vorsha class ship out.
Yeah.
Or a Vorsha, one of their larger ships, rather than some little thing,
Yeah.
I think the bird of prey is like a stealth craft, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing that big. But anyway, so when we talking about scientific principles here, we kind of get off track with the torpedoes, plasma torpedoes.
Yeah.
They didn't really define what that was. I've heard it over and over again, but they never really defined what a plasma torpedo actually did. But it's an interesting principle. Using
and when I think of the word plasma, it's like I think of the salt, the four states of matter, and of course plasma has to, I'm thinking, is it spitting out a sort of a liquidy kind of energy thing, or is it, and how does it travel, and expand out around? Because they said what it does is it creates an envelopment around the ship and causes an implosion. At least that's how Spot described it. Because remember, he had a piece of the debris from the station and he crushed it and it just like crumbled in his hand. Because apparently apparently that plasma envelopment turns the metal very weak. It makes it very brittle. And
he said it was titanium, but then he crushed it. This isn't titanium anymore. Something changed the matter of it, and there were Klingons involved in that. So
right.
Yeah. So but like I said, maybe Klingons use a different type of weapon system than humans do.
Mm. Yeah.
So maybe a plasma weapon or a plasma torpedo might actually have deleterious effects to matter.
Yeah.
Kind of like atomic weapons do.
Yeah.
So, that's now. Of course, I have one last one I want to do. I don't know if you want to do one after this, because I have one last one I want to do. I may lead into other ones as I go along, but this is the one I was discussing. And of course, that's the biggie in Star Trek, is warp drive. Now, let's just think about this. If they didn't have warp drive, how long would the average mission in Star Trek actually end up lasting? Like a whole season for one thing, because you have to get from there to here, on these giant starships that are only traveling at what they call sublight speeds. So warp drive actually essentially shrunk down the whole galaxy. And I don't mean where you can see Vulcan from Delta Vega either. I mean, not that kind of shrinking.
I can see your house from here.
Yeah. But no, I mean, and like I said, this is something we talked about that, we may want to, neither of us are good enough at math to figure out the exact principles of this. But basically, warp drive is explained where warp 1 is the speed of light. And as Stuart Foley, Captain Foley, hello, Captain, he's explained in one of his videos about the progression of starships in the 21st and 22nd century, pre-Federation ships, that warp drive is an incremental step.
Yeah.
And you mentioned something about ultra warp speed. So I looked this up because I wanted to know, what's this ultra warp speed they use in the future? Well, here's how Memory Alpha explains how warp speed works. They talk about the 24th century. At some point, infinite velocity was designated as warp factor 10. And that extreme high warp speeds were indicated with decimal values between 9 and 10. Such as warp 9.975, the maximum speed of the Intrepid class. Yeah. So we're supposed to assume that warp 9 and warp 9.975 are significantly different.
Yeah,
The warp 9 is very, very slow compared to that.
Yeah.
So
it's like almost like the closer you get to warp 10, it's like there's an extra pull that makes it.
And I'm wondering, do you think that's what that ultra warp is, that area between that?
Yeah. It makes it, because ultra warp 2 is faster than regular warp 2.
Right, except I couldn't find any canon mention of ultra warp at all. There's no mention of it. So I'm wondering where in canon that actually appeared. You mentioned in TOS there was a mention of ultra warp speeds.
Yeah.
Now, was that just one of those TOS words that came out of the blue, or was there any?
Well, it may have been at that time, but I mean, now that they're using it today, I mean, I guess you could say Spock was referring to Nomad being able to have that ability to travel like the same kind of speeds that the Enterprise D.
Did you hear the term ultra warp specifically being used in Voyager, Deep Space Nine, Next Generation?
The term ultra warp?
Well, because you mentioned that, that they converted over to ultra warp at some point, and I'm just wondering where you heard that.
I read it in a book actually, because people were wondering why the Enterprise D is using the same levels of warp, and yet they're advertising the ship as being able to go much faster than the Kirk's ship. And everybody's saying, well, how is it going faster? Because the top speed of the Enterprise from TOS was warp 8, maybe almost warp 9, and the Enterprise D was like warp 9.3, I guess it was their maximum speed. And so it's like, well, when you're saying they can travel at much greater speeds, it's like, well, so I guess at some point they had to address it and say, well, that's because this ship with the new engines is using a whole different type of warp metric scale, and warp 2 for the Galaxy class D is faster than the warp 2 on Kirk's ship. And that was the only way I heard it ever explained.
Yeah. The thing with those books is they tend to be in the category of headcanon. So I was just trying to figure out, but
I think it was from Michael Okuda though that wrote that, and he actually worked on the show. So
I mean, I guess Memory Alpha didn't include it, so I don't know if it's because Memory Alpha is canon cities. So but perhaps the ultra warp thing is not so much a distinct word, but more like a layman explanation for the increased warp power. Like maybe the warp scale is just different. I mean, because you never hear them saying, "Oh, ultra warp 6" or anything.
Yeah.
But like I said, obviously, if they have that speed between warp 9 and warp 9.975, that could be where the ultra warp scale is important because.
I mean, they also tried to illustrate the fact that the ship could go faster by if you look at the when you're looking at the model of the Enterprise when at head on, you'll see that the front of the Buzard collectors have 2 glowing orbs inside of them. That was supposed to represent that each of those nacelles has actually 2 type of the TOS nacelles.
Yeah, you were telling me that there's actually 2 TOS style Bazaar collectors.
It's actually got 4 TOS warp nacelles on the ship pulling it along. So that was supposed to indicate that this ship actually does go faster because it's got the the extra power of 2 extra warp nacelles.
I always thought that Bazaar collector was just like one singular thing. But I always thought those 2 little glowing lights, and I said, "What is that?" And you said those are supposed to be 2 TOS style.
Yeah, it's supposed to be. Yeah, it was supposed to indicate to the audience how much faster the ship.
Right, and when you look at it on the map, on the cutaway map, and you look at that, you can see they look like 2 little TOS things inside there.
Yeah.
TOS fronts. So, I mean, who knows? Maybe in the future they'll have 4 or 5 of them.
And the Enterprise E, if you look, it has 3 in the front. If you look at the nacelle design, there's actually 3 glowing.
Right, it looks like a little barrel, like a gun barrel.
Yeah.
And there's
so it's actually So they're saying that these engines are even a little more powerful than from the engines on the D, the nacelles on the D. So it's
incremental steps. Yeah. The warp drive always fascinated me in a way it could expand on itself. They could develop the technology, and they could go faster. Yet a lot of people who run Star Trek sites say don't make Olympic ships. Well, they're doing it in the regular universe. So
really.
I just think some of those people don't want you to compete with what they're doing.
There's a reason why the ships have to be bigger, and I think we explained that in the previous video. That the further out into space you go, the more you have to take with you. And these ships obviously have to be bigger, right? Because if you're going to bring larger crews, then they're going to have more quarters, and if they're going to be out for a long period of time, then they might want to have to take their families because they may not see them for 10.
That's what the Galaxy class ship was supposed to be.
Yeah, so these ships are going to have to be large to be out in space for so many years, so that they're going to naturally be bigger. It's not big. It's not a pissing contest, like who can make the biggest starship. It's just it's a need to go out further than the other ships could.
Right. Where with a starship like the Intrepid class, I mean that's relatively big, but I would qualify it as a light cruiser. Something that was designed for maybe to be out for a year or so and then come back.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know how long that ship was supposed to last. I mean.
Well, it had a very small crew complement, so it was plenty of room on that ship for people. And I'm figuring, they probably could stay out in space for a number of years before they'd have to come back.
We talked about just this weird idea that a week after being out there, they were short on supplies, which is a little weird, but...
Yeah, that was the very second episode. Oh, everything is going down to nothing, It's like...
This is a start that's fairly advanced for its day, so...
Yeah.
It's just weird. I mean,
you shouldn't have had to worry about supplies being low until almost like to the end of the series.
Well, with the Galaxy class, it would be like, no problem. We can just spend time in our holodecks and enjoy ourselves. When we get back, we'll be fine.
Yeah,
those ships were designed to be out there that long.
Yeah,
I would think the Voyager was too, but they had to make it dramatic somehow. Like this ship is weak and
Well, the Enterprise D could have actually made that whole voyage. You know, what was it?
Right, like I said, there would have been no problem. Like, oh, we got our holodecks, we're all cool, we'll have fun out
The
here.
Odyssey class was designed to go 80 years.
They could do that whole trip without 7 years. Yeah, they could have.
Yeah. They would have made it.
Oh, we are on our last bit of power. Oops, we're back on Earth now. Thank you, Grandpa, Captain.
Yep.
You know, that kind of thing. I'm just saying, it would be a multi-generational ship, but still.
Yeah. They wouldn't have to refuel the deuterium for quite a while along that voyage, you know, because it's, you know, it's
unless they set the crew in hibernation, in which case.
Yeah, well.
Wake up in the future, but.
It's a thing that they never really do much of. I mean, they did it in Voyager one time. Remember where they was crossing that space that was deadly to the crew?
Yeah, it's weird though. I mean, they talked about that in Spacey, how after the 21st century they didn't need to have that. So
yeah, because they had warp drive after that. You didn't have to sleep. So
well, speaking of warp drive, the date of it we obviously said at 2063, but
yeah.
That MacGyver's and TOS implied that after 2018, it took years to travel. Before 2018, it took years to travel from one place to another. Does that mean that warp drive came around in 2018 or something? Or was that just like, was she speaking of sublight coming around that time or something?
Maybe. Yeah, they don't. Yeah, again, it wasn't very specific. It was very vague how they.
Well, it was a historian saying this, so I'm assuming that, you know, maybe she was so infatuated by Khan she got it off by a century. I mean, I don't know, honestly. But they said it's only her 2018, so.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those other things about the 60s where people had such high hopes for the year we're living in now. I mean, can you remember reflect on the movies that were made back then and how they envisioned the 21st century?
Right. Or you look at educational videos where they show it like, oh, this is 1989 and it looks like the Jetsons.
Yeah, they really had a lot of high hopes for, you know, humanity to really advance in just 30 years.
Well, and then they didn't take into account manipulative politicians ruining it all.
Yeah.
You don't take that kind of thing into account.
Goes to show you how much of an influence politics can play in human evolution.
Right. I mean, futurists don't take into account conservatism.
Yeah.
Because, you know, conservatives will always keep things primitive.
Yeah.
That's the nature of conservatism. They don't want things to progress. They want things to stay the same.
Yeah.
So if conservatism wasn't a thing that existed in the way it does now, we might be living in the Jetsons. Who knows?
Yeah, we have flying cars and all these things. Yeah.
There were probably garbage fuel.
But it came along in the 80s, you know, or the late 70s would have been an internet, you know.
Right. So, I mean, you know, we're inventing our own little timelines for our future, you know. Maybe that was what TOS was going by. It was going by the New Frontier, you know, Kennedy's New Frontier.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure you see them on YouTube. I mean, it's part of Americana now. Yeah, the year is 1999. We're in flying cars, and we're living up on these big tubes or whatever.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe that's why some people say that, well, Star Trek's a floating timeline because the point of views of each universe changes things.
Yeah.
But
it would make watching it very confusing if they kept altering you know, the standard of Star Trek every time we would go up, and like 20 years later, then we'd have to re-envision everything all over again. So it would be like it would never seem consistent. It would never be like a beginning, right. A natural beginning and an end. It would be
a total floating timeline.
Yeah. So, you know, you might as well just do like Doctor Who, you know, I mean, because that's basically what that's like. I mean, you know, you never know where you're going to be.
I don't need to go back to Doctor Who for this, but I get a kick out of people saying, oh, you're stepping all over Doctor Who canon. What canon?
Yeah, there's nothing solid, you know.
Canon doesn't apply to that show at all. You're time traveling in every friggin' episode.
Yeah.
So how could there be canon to this universe that doesn't respect any kind of canon at all?
Yeah.
It's everywhere in time and space. Canon flies away in a second.
Yeah.
You know, I'm surprised the Daleks don't even just fly away and go away half the time.
Yeah, really. It's like they haven't done anything yet to...
But when the Daleks actually mastered time travel, now they're proof to all these changes. I mean, who knows? Some of the aliens he encountered may not even exist thanks to what he's done.
Yeah.
Or she now. But the point I'm trying to make is that, so yeah, Doctor Who, I don't see it having a distinct canon.
Yeah.
It's a time travel, so it's like, oh, you're disrespecting Quantum Leap canon. He leaps around putting things right where ones went wrong.
Yeah.
How do you have a canon with that?
Yeah.
I mean, saying Quantum Leap's canon would be enough to make Ziggy, wah! You know, that's so with Star Trek, though, there's a linear time progression, so it would have to kind of be
Yeah, in order to make it understandable.
I don't think people really expected that line about 2018 to really impact on people all that much. So,
Yeah.
and you can just say, well, maybe she was referring to a pre-warp kind of high speed.
Yeah.
Like maybe they had some sort of sublight ability or something at that time, which I know we don't, but
Yeah.
who knows? I mean, the eugenics war supposedly happened and we lived through it.
You would think with the creation of the atomic energy that would have been like the beginning of actually mastering some sort of sublight speed engine or something like that.
Well, I ain't some conspiracy theorist here, but I wonder, look at our time. There are things that we know in our time about Rome that were very, very secret while Rome was around.
Hmm.
You got to wonder if there were things that are happening in our time that are secret now but are known in the Star Trek universe as being average.
Yeah.
I haven't read the Eugenics Wars book, but I'm just trying to fit canon together here.
Yeah.
Like there are some things we just don't talk about in our world, things we're doing or whatever.
Yeah.
But and I don't want to feed into that because I know we can be very paranoid in this time. We can make a lot of stuff up. I'm just saying that could kind of, the Eugenics Wars novels kind of put that into it.
Mm-hmm.
That it wasn't known in its time, but in the future it was declassified or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, but even in the Star Trek world, I mean, you never heard anybody talk about NX-01 until they do NX-01. You see Riker on it, so. Yeah. But with the warp drive thing, yeah, it never occurred to me that the warp 9.975 were big leaps. I always thought they were like part of the 9 spectrum.
Yeah, if you look at the graph of it, it's like a real big jump on the graph when you get closer to warp 10. It really
right. That warp 9.975 is a huge jump.
Yeah,
like a whole other warp scale. So I'm wondering if that's where the ultra warp scale is, that 9 to 975.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if that's the case, what would a warp 9.999 be?
Yeah.
Were you able to zip to the gamma quadrant in like 2 seconds?
Yeah, I mean, why, if Voyager, let's say, remember that episode where they were trying to hit warp 10 and they turned into these lizards? So, if they could have just gotten just very, close, but not quite warp 10, they still could have cut down, months and months off their journey back home if they could just push the Voyager further past that red line.
Well, yeah, they were trying to kind of control how warp 10 worked, if you remember.
Yeah. But you would think that if they could get it as close as they could, that would actually cut a lot of time off of their.
Like maybe, get them to warp 9.999, and maybe they can get home in maybe a month or so.
Yeah.
But, I think Janeway being a scientist, she wanted to explore things and,
Yeah. I mean, if they could get a shuttlecraft to go to the warp 10 scale, I mean, imagine Voyager, with their sophisticated technology would have been able to do that in itself, Of
course, they all would have been lizards when they got back, but. I get to see them coming back to Earth, and I say, "Oh, Voyager's back." I don't hear any hails. They go through. Why are a bunch of Gila monsters on this ship?
Is that what we're supposed to end up becoming, as lizards again? I guess.
Speaking of science. That was a very weird looking evolution. We all evolve into orange Gila monsters, basically.
Maybe that's why all the ships start to get flatter, because we get shorter, and we don't have to have all that headspace.
Right. So maybe they're trying to make. Maybe Voyager was the lizard show. Like we'd have lizard ships and lizard people, and that was the lizard show. Star Trek, the salamander generation. Our ships look like lizards. We turn into lizards.
Let's do a Star Trek show that's way in the future, and all the characters are salamanders.
Star Trek, the salamander generation. We left the pond, went into the universe. So, okay, we've actually created 2 alternate universes in this video right here. So, okay, so that's my last little scientific principle is warp drive. Is there anything that really catches your?
Not really. No, I think we covered it all.
Well, there's a lot of Star Trek science that I love in the fast. We kind of covered the Universal Translator in our first one, which I kind of think about redoing because we didn't do it in this format. We were doing it in the living room, and I noticed a lot of YouTubers, if they do their first video, they're like, well, that isn't my best video. I'm going to go back and redo it, but I may not. But I think we did well with that one. Replicators we covered. I
think there were some that we did where the sound wasn't all that great. We could probably reduce some of those maybe.
Yeah, well, I'm not doing a video about ones we could redo. We'll anyway, so that can be a future time. Yeah. But anyway, so we covered all the Star Trek technologies. And I'm sure everybody has your favorite. So it's an interactive thing. Subscribe. And when I share this on Facebook, by the way, if I share this on Facebook with you, if you're watching this, don't like this video here. Like it in our channel on YouTube. Like it over there because we're not on Facebook. We're over there. So go over to YouTube and like us there. Help us build up our community. And if there's any other Star Trek science principles you like out there, write it down in the comments. Yeah. And as they say about the lottery, please comment responsibly. Thank you. Anyway, responsibly. Yep. Yeah. I mean, you all know what I'm talking about. Anyway, so episode 45 coming up next week. We're not talking about Donald Trump either. We're talking about our episode 45. Yeah. So, and whatever that is, until next week, keep on trekking, live long and prosper.